Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss on the strategy after this COVID-19. We have our world famous speaker, Professor David Schumacher, Mr. Adam, he is our honorable fellow for World Talent Economy Forum, Professor David Smith, Professor Ching, Professor Donald, Professor Paul, and Professor Jai Raman. First, I would like to give chance Professor David Schumacher.
Yeah, hi, Sharif. Glad we're talking about COVID-19 endgame today. It's been a long 2 years in this true pandemic cycle of COVID-19. And looking at how pandemics are, the different phases of the pandemics, from what I've read and what I've heard from National Institute of Health leaders here in the United States, they would call what we've been through in the last 2 years the true pandemic phase. Probably don't need any explanation of what that is. We've all been subject to it. Certain parts of the world, the part that I'm in, are entering what they call the deceleration stage, where virus is receding. And that came along with Omicron. Omicron, which was highly and is highly transmissible, but overall much less causes much less severe sickness and much less death. So even as Omicron tended to spike here in my home state of Arizona, deaths continue, fortunately, to recede, as did the load on hospitals and ICU wards. So Omicron is a two-edged sword, and it helps us in the next part of the pandemic phase, which is called the control or the endemic phase. And that's where the virus is still working, but it's safe to take fewer precautions because there's been a lot of naturally generated immunity from Omicron. And in certain parts of the world, vaccination has also helped. So this is what we're probably going to find ourselves in for a while, because the desirable phase to get to is elimination or eradication, which has happened in some cases in the past. But from what I understand from local health authorities where my partner works, and just reading in general, we're probably not going to get that way with COVID-19. There's no lifelong immunity that we know of for COVID-19, no vaccine way to do that. And something that's controversial but needs to be brought out is the fact that the actual origins of COVID-19 still remain a mystery. While there are many theories out there, we don't know. And that makes it much harder to be able to keep something at bay when we don't know where it came from and if it could come back. Also, looking at UN statistics, I was shocked to see that just on March 30th, the World Health Organization published that at least a third of the world's population has no immunity against COVID-19. And on the African continent, it's much higher, up in the 80% area or so. That's just amazing, because no matter where you live on the planet, if there's an incubator someplace, it can still regenerate itself and still come around. So what's next? That's what we want to talk about. What's next? I don't think anybody knows with certainty, but what most authorities are saying is that it's likely that the virus will continue to evolve, perhaps becoming less lethal as it does, but there's no guarantee of that. There always could be a resurgence of a more lethal strain, but probably not likely. That would be the worst possible scenario. So what do we do about this? UN Health Agency has listed some points as far as what we need to do to stay vigilant for pandemics, not only COVID-19 or variants returning, but other pandemics we're not even thinking about right now. And those have to do with surveillance, investment in laboratories, and investment in public health investigations and so forth. Also, mRNA vaccines have been very helpful, and perhaps that research will still continue, and we could do maybe rapid development for anything new that comes up, but that goes back to surveillance. So we need to be on guard. We need to make our health systems more resilient so that we're not so likely to be overrun when we have a surge of some type happens. And then, of course, research and development must continue. So as we're in this deacceleration stage, we need to be moving from this emergency mode that we've been in over the last couple of years into more of a long-term planning, disease surveillance, investigation, and management phase, and that will take political will. There's some things that'll complicate this. We've talked about war, we've talked about economics. Both of those are creating refugees of different type, which move people from less vaccinated areas into perhaps more vaccinated areas and can carry in strains that maybe haven't been seen to date or can carry in other things. Plus, just the technological advantages, which I love, and I think most of the viewers know, as far as that technological physical travel, being able to travel further, faster, more often, allows pandemics to spread much, much quicker than they would have in the past. But we need other clear new technologies too. Maybe one of the reasons for vaccination being so low is I know people that just are fearful of needles. Maybe we need other ways to inject vaccines or other treatments. I've seen some promising work done on a nasal vaccine for that you would inhale for COVID-19. So maybe that would help. And we need to get over some of these irrational fears that come along with something that comes up suddenly that we don't understand and it causes harm. So we as humans have this tendency to want to point the finger, find somebody to blame. All I'm saying as far as that's concerned is that causes us to not take the kind of action that we should, and maybe some type of public education, something that would help as far as making it easier to be able to work with authorities, to work with science and research, to be able to help us in the future and maybe try to overcome some of these irrational fears. So what's next? We don't know. I'm hopeful that this will continue to wane. I do believe it's going to be with us for a while. And I think that we do need to stay vigilant, but that can be hard because there'll be other problems that will crop up outside of pandemics that will divert our focus and maybe our political will and therefore our money to prepare for the next pandemic. But I remain hopeful that we can continue to better than we've done in the past. So those are my opening remarks, Sharif.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor David Schumacher. Mr. Adam, what do you want to add when we are overcoming from this COVID-19 situations? What type of initiative we can take?
Thank you, Sharif. Good to see everyone today. Well, no doubt we have experienced living through a great historical period. It's an interesting feeling, well, a mixture of different feelings. Can't quite decide if world events have brought people together in solidarity or divided people even further. I know in this country and undoubtedly in many others, people in government have come under scrutiny and criticism for behaving illegally, breaking COVID rules when they were applied so severely to everybody else. It's definitely highlighted class division. That's one thing people from other countries feel quite surprised about when they come to Britain as visitors or students is the class system we have here, and certainly the bad behaviour of our leaders has emphasised that once again. But of course, even they have to answer to some people, no matter how high up you think you are in society, there's always someone above you. Like Dr. Schumacher said, it has been a long 2 years, and I think the hangover from those 2 years may last for longer, and a lot can happen in 2 years. So much can happen in 2 years. We have a mental health crisis to address, caused partly by social isolation, separation from loved ones, lack of contact, absence of tactile stimulation such as hugs and familial contact. We also have to reflect on how trustworthy our world leaders are, people we entrust with our life quality, our happiness, our physical and mental health. I know a lot of people are angry at what they feel has been a mishandling of the situation on the part of some people in authority. A lot of people lost loved ones in hospitals, and they blame hospital staff and medical staff for being what they perceived as negligent at the time. But a lot of these jobs and responsibilities are thankless. One can be an executive in charge of something, and no matter what you do, you can do either this or that. But people always find something to criticize. So yeah, that is my opening thoughts.
Thank you, Professor David Smith. What you want to add for today's dialogue? What's new?
To look at COVID and particularly beginning to look at it as an end game is, I think, a little bit of challenge as we put the pieces together and understand the different variations of COVID. I recently saw a very interesting chart that began to look at how the different variations of COVID have been played and used, and the results are really very surprising to me. I did very well, I believe, as I looked back through my past and what I did, and I was successful in not catching COVID until really the last variations. And I think that was equal to a bunch of my peers in what we saw. And Sharif, the graphic I sent you is the official RO rates for the different variations of COVID and how they compare to some of the other diseases. Part of where I'm seeing us doing going in the future is as we build up more immunity, as we see more, like David said earlier, other variations of vaccines and other treatments come to bear, we will see that. But, you know, if you go down and look at the original SARS virus and then the other ones going up, the transmission factors of this last, of Delta, and then the Omi variants, the BA1 and now the BA1B, you know, the transmission rate is very high, but the lethality of it's lower. And you begin to look down at the bottom at measles, and COVID with the Omicron variants is just beginning to be on par with the transmission RO index of measles. So we kind of see that in variation. And I think the reality is that increasingly more and more of us are going to have a case of COVID, just like most of us have a case of the flu. And what I'm reading, what I'm seeing is that the World Health organizations around the country, around the world, are beginning to look at what is it going to take to change COVID from a pandemic to an epidemic. And that looks like that's going to be one of the next gates that we go through as we begin to come off of it. We also saw some interesting things. Some of the scientific research coming back right now is that the Omicron virus is not really derived from the original version of COVID-19, but is really more of a descendant that came from an immune compromised person. And it is not from the original, but it's from one of the mid views of it. We are also seeing a new subvariant of Omicron, the BA2, which was informally named the stealth Omicron. It is even more transmittable than BA1 from what the early studies say. So we're beginning to see them, but it will begin to go through. We're seeing that the symptoms through the population are more asthmatic and have really mild illnesses in most of the places. We're beginning to see the flu come back and what's happening and the various restrictions around that. And my trends I'm seeing is that as we look at the end of the COVID pandemic, and as it begins to downplay more into an epidemic stat, we're seeing many of the restrictions loosened. But we're seeing various different approaches from in China, they are still in a very heavy lockdown approach. When there is, and their approach is zero tolerance with people who are suspected of carrying and for the whole community. To other approaches where there's very little social distancing, very little lockdown, but more of a tracking program. I believe tracking would help, but most societies really believe the personal privacy come into play above some of the tracking protocols. So it's going to be really difficult to put all those in place. But if you look at number of infections versus population, number of infections versus people who have been vaccinated with at least the base vaccinations, we're still at the point where about globally 45% of the population globally has not been vaccinated. You see places like Africa where that percentage is much higher. And it will be around, and it's continuing to mutate. And we're seeing very little of the original versions of COVID in the population anymore. And it's mostly the newer mutations of what was there that's in the population. So it's just like here in the United States, they come out with an annual flu vaccine that's different from the flu vaccine from the year before. I think we'll begin to see that with COVID too, with new formulations coming out year after year to try to address the different variations of COVID. And I think that's the start of beginning to move it back to, like I said, from a pandemic to an epidemic. So Sharif, thanks.
Thank you. Professor Ching.
Yes, from the big picture, you see, pandemics occurs roughly every 100 years. So after this one, maybe, we don't need to worry about another pandemic. And in comparison, financial crisis occurs about 20 years. So a lot of financial crises will occur before we worry about pandemics. But on the other hand, you see, this pandemic is population density related. So that, for example, basically, viruses are nature's way to shrink down the population of living things, starting with the oldest and the weakest. Okay, so today we have much dense population. So pandemic may become a much frequent crisis than in the past. So one thing we can learn from this pandemic is that it seems that we can be sure that nature can cure us if it wants to. Okay, if Omicron turn out to be severe, we all be dead. And the thing is, I would probably conclude this in the end, but it seems like nature created the virus and also nature cured the pandemic with Omicron. And Omicron is so dominant, so it protects us from other severe viruses. So it's kind of many lessons I guess we need to be humble. We need to learn from the nature's way of handling this until we become more knowledgeable than nature. Omicron for Omicron is 70 times more, transmit faster than Delta. So it's very fast. Okay. And there is we have as humans we have two choices. We can take the vaccine or we get the virus. The conclusion is that if we take the vaccine, my own experience too, it damages the heart. Okay, I just calculate very roughly. It damages about 3%, and the heart can recover fastest 0.5% per year. So it would take me 6 years to recover. But because I'm a dancer, I dance 3 times a week, so I seem to have recovered much faster than just just waiting for 6 years. Okay, so the heart damage is not trivial. Okay, some people just die. Okay, but on the average, it's about 3%. That's my very rough calculation. Don't count me on, on this. And also, if you catch COVID, okay, they have research come out very recently, 2 months ago. If you catch COVID, even it's very mild, it has an after effect to shrink the brain. Okay, neurological damage. Okay, so you have a choice of the heart or the brain. Okay, and I got both. I got the Omicron. I think I got Omicron. I got it over in 5 hours. Got fever over 40. Okay, so I got both. So basically, my heart and my brain got a taste of this pandemic, and I think it's probably not going to affect me too much. I think I can fight, I can recover, and I can gradually improve. And finally, I want to mention this one last thing, which people may not notice, that China might pose a danger in the future if they keep this lockdown. And when the whole world has recovered from the pandemic, the rest of the world has largely recovered from pandemic, then they again come out with this widespread Omicron in China, and it mutate. Okay, the consequences can be very strange, unpredictable. But still, Omicron seems to be the cure. Okay, so my bet is, it's over. The end game. It's the pandemic is over. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Donald.
Well, I'm really glad Hugh brought up the long-term damage that COVID. I have a Nature article here in front of me that says that there's a 72% increase in heart attacks in the first year, and it seems to continue. And every time you get COVID, even asymptomatic cases, it increases your chance of getting heart disease and brain damage, or you basically get damage to your heart and your brain. And so I've met people who've had COVID 3 times, and each time they get more damage. It's cumulative. And so COVID is bad, a very bad disease. And one of the things about the end game is that we won't know what the end game is for a long, long time, because all of the damage that's being done to people who are getting mild cases of COVID right now, we won't know for years, because we won't see the consequences of what's happening to people right now for a long time. it's something that's going to be we're going to continue to see. I was at the grocery store the other day, and the tellers were wearing masks, and I was wearing a mask. I wear an N95 mask whenever I'm inside with other people, and so does my wife, and so does every medical professional I know. I mentioned to the teller, I said, that's smart of you to wear a mask. And they said, well, yeah. And they said, well, my father got COVID and never got over it. He got long COVID and it damaged his lungs, and he's never recovered. And the teller next door said, yeah, my mother got COVID and she's never recovered. And so there are a vast amount of people that got COVID and have never recovered. So we, as a society, a world, we don't even understand what the consequences yet of COVID, long COVID are, and the people that are disabled from COVID we don't know how to diagnose them yet. We don't know how to treat them. It's an incredible problem. Right now, there's two new variants, BA3 and BA4, that are in South Africa and England, and are starting to spread. You can get BA2 multiple times. There's no basically immunity, lingering immunity to it. You get it, and 6 months later you can get it again, and then you can also get Delta, and then BA2 and BA3 and BA4. There's no limit on how often you can get all these different kinds of COVID. So you can just get COVID over and over and over and over. And as far as we know, you can get two different kinds of COVID at the same time. So I don't understand why we would think there's an end to it right now, because it's actually virulent and widely. What seems to, in the United States, what seems to have happened is that politically, there's some people that have basically, for some reason, used it as a political thing about their freedom or something like that. I mean, people who will burn books, because people who will ban books feel that their freedom is impinged by wearing a mask. I mean, the same people in the United States, it's absolutely bizarre, have created so much problems that the United States has basically stopped testing people. So we have no idea how much COVID there is in the United States. It's completely, we don't know. Because of home testing, and other reasons, it's unknown. The end game is we just abandon it. We just let it go, and we stopped warning people about it. A huge number of people just decided that they were going to get it and stop worrying about it. They started to believe it was no big deal. There's a rumor or a belief that viruses become less virulent and more contagious. And in general, that's true. I mean, a virus becomes more successful if it doesn't kill the people. It's easier for it to move to people if they're alive. I mean, it doesn't help if the people are dead. So that's a tendency, but it's not always the case. Viruses can become more virulent. So as COVID keeps mutating the way that it's been doing, it's conceivably possible that it's going to mutate into a more virulent strain at one time. So we don't really know what COVID's going to do. So it's still there. I mean, there's no end to it right now. It's there. It's active in the population, and it's still very dangerous. So my hope is, and I'm kind of excited by the fact that we are learning more and more about how to make vaccines that target parts of the virus that don't mutate. And there are vaccines now that are being tested that do target, as I said, areas of the virus that don't mutate. They have flu vaccines now that they're testing that target parts of flu that don't mutate. That's one of the problems with flu. There actually, we call a whole range of viruses that are pretty different than each other. We call them all flu. So that's kind of an issue. They're different. So influenza A is kind of pretty different than influenza B. So, and again, as someone else pointed out, it's conceivably possible that we can kind of get ahead of the curve. So, like right now, we know about SARS, the BA3 and the BA4 variant. Conceivably, we could be making a BA3 and BA4 vaccine right now and getting it out to people so that the countries that don't have that yet could be getting vaccinated in time so that it doesn't become a problem in these countries. So there are ways that we could mitigate it right now. But and the one other thing I want to say about it is, since China is there's a whole other consequence that Hugh mentioned, which is that China's lockdown is going to have consequences that we're not going to see for a little while, which is that China has stopped shipping stuff to the world. And the supply chain is breaking again. And the whole world's economy is having to reconfigure itself. And the era that we've had of globalization that's provided a lot of cheap stuff is over. And no one knows what's going to happen. Where things are manufactured is totally changing. And we don't know how. Everybody's scrambling to figure out what's going to happen. But we're going to see prices going up, and we're not going to see them coming back down. And how, with great chaos comes great opportunity, I guess. So it's a time that, if you keep your eyes open, you might be able to find great opportunity. But we're going to see great chaos. There's a person I saw on TikTok, and I think they probably had some sense, who was counting the number of ships that were leaving the ports in China, and the number has gone down to practically none. So those are the ships that come here with stuff on them from China. And so right now, we're going to just start feeling the consequences of that. So that's a consequence of COVID. So the end game isn't here yet by a long shot. And it's something we're going to be having to see and think about. So
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Professor Donald. Professor Paul, if you share some exit strategy of this COVID-19 situations and what's going on in North America, how we can develop a better strategy for healthcare and climate change, you can share with our audience.
Well, I hope that the world has learned some lessons from this pandemic. And if there was one lesson that I would say is the most important, is that, a big part of human health is the quality of the air that we're breathing indoors. We spend lots of time indoors. And we know that these viruses are transmittable not just through sneezing and coughing indoors, which sprays droplets, in the air a certain distance from you, and this leads to the 2 meter or 6 feet, personal space sort of idea. But the viruses are also, as they come out of your body just from your breathing, they're very, very small and they become airborne, not entrapped in droplets. And when they're airborne in an indoor space, they can stay in that space for 6 to 8 hours to longer, depending on the ventilation of that indoor space. So if the ventilation or the air exchange with outdoor air is very, very high, then the virus would not linger in that indoor space for very long, and the risk of catching COVID would be lower. So it all comes down to indoor air quality. These pandemics that are airborne are mostly, an indoor problem. They're transmitted in indoor spaces by groups of people being together. So, thus the very important, the great importance of wearing masks. And also, we do have ways to measure the amount of the risk, the indoor risk, and that's simply using carbon dioxide, measurements of carbon dioxide concentrations as a proxy for indoor air quality and the amount of ventilation there is, because we all breathe out CO2, and when the CO2 levels become much higher in the indoor space than the outdoor environment, then there's a problem. You clearly don't have enough ventilation. So I think that, if governments around the world and municipal, federal, provincial, or state governments set air quality standards for indoor air spaces and set maximum limits and use CO2 as a proxy, and actually you can get very inexpensive little CO2 detectors, which then flash a big number saying this is the CO2 level in the indoor space. And if there's building codes that say that number should not go, say, more than double the ambient external number which is about 420 parts per million. So, if CO2 levels go above, say, 800 parts per million in an indoor space, an alarm could go off and there's a problem. The risk of catching a virus or a flu or a cold or from somebody else in that indoor space is very, very high. So it's not just COVID or, it's also the normal flus, it's colds, any of these airborne transmitted illnesses or sicknesses could be greatly reduced very simply by having better building codes on indoor ventilation. So I hope that if we've learned one thing from this pandemic, that is that we will be concerned about indoor spaces. And the other thing is that yes, historically the return period of major pandemics, may be 100 years. Actually, it's actually sooner than that, but the risk of more frequent pandemics occurring is ever increasing because of climate change destroying ecosystems and habitats, and also our proclivity to monocultures in food that we grow, etc. As we lose biodiversity, the risks of new pandemics being incubated in stressed environments becomes much, much higher. So, this is why it's extremely important that we take action as soon as possible on indoor air quality. And also, China's been talked about. The lockdowns in China, I don't think they can just be described in any other way as being sort of draconian. I mean, the thing is if you look at the mortality of people in a place like Shanghai, it's almost zero from the virus, and yet the entire city is locked and shut down, and many people are, there's lots of suicides, there's lots of deaths. The supply is being completely disrupted. People being locked in their apartment buildings, high rises, not being able to leave for weeks on end. You have to look at the damages to people and society from those measures, and I would argue that they far exceed the damages from the virus. Now, the other thing is you end up with a population in China that has not been exposed to the virus, so these people are all vulnerable to similar future type viruses. The population not exposed to the virus or vaccines is not a protected population from this type of virus. So those are just some of the key points. Like the single most important one is, we have good technologies to measure and protect make sure the air in indoor spaces is high quality and low risk to any transmission of any virus. So hopefully we change building codes and take this seriously, because it took us a lot of, after coronavirus hit, it took us quite a while for governments and medical community, et cetera, to talk about the importance of decent indoor air spaces, right? There was lots of argument about how the thing was transmitted, et cetera, et cetera. If you're outdoors and you're not near people, you're completely safe. It took a long time for this type of information to get through to the public from the authorities, or even to be talked about by the authorities. And we never learned from the 1918 influenza, because the same sort of thing happened. So anyway, so and I do agree, the way that viruses tend to mutate, they tend to become far more transmissible and far less lethal. And this is kind of nature's way, if you like, of vaccinating, in quotes, the public. I mean, catching a very mild form of the virus does give you those vaccination properties. We do need to be concerned about the so-called long COVID, although I think most people that, unless they have underlying, health conditions, they're generally probably going to fare okay in the long run. But there are a lot of uncertainties about, how many people, will have this long COVID, and the actual, results of it, what it will do. So thank you. Yeah, I'm finished.
He's frozen.
Oh, okay.
Frozen.
So somebody who hasn't talked can just take over, I guess.
Tally, why don't you go ahead and talk?
Talib, your voice is
It's not coming through.
or maybe Professor Ear can.
Yep. Professor Leah, why don't you go ahead and go, since we cannot hear Talib?
Professor Ye, you want to talk now? Nobody else is talking.
Yeah. Professor Lighty, can you hear us?
You cannot hear us.
No, is somebody going to say something? I
How
can
about,
keep
how
talking.
about David? David Shoemaker, you go ahead.
I think we're back to David now. Yeah.
Let's get things going.
I never have to be coerced into talking. Thank you. We'll overcome our technical difficulties and we'll get Sharif back shortly. But I'll start with my closing remarks on some notes that I made. And Hugh, I actually want to start by thanking you, talking about the cycle of pandemics, that every 100-year cycle is deceptive, as I think you pointed out, and pointed out that pandemics are likely to occur in shorter and shorter cycles for a variety of reasons that we talked about. Population density, you mentioned, but also travel, perhaps waning public support and distraction. There can be a number of things that can cause that if we don't take corrective action. So what type of corrective actions? Medical, of course. I've already talked about research and development, talked about strengthening our healthcare systems. Paul, thanks very much for your talks on CO2 and on building codes and so forth, because I really think that what I call invisible tech, can be very helpful, not only for pandemics, but just keeping the spread of communicable diseases to a minimum as we move forward, as climate change happens, as population densities increase in certain areas and so forth. So what kind of invisible tech? Well, Paul talked about CO2, he talked about air filtration, but there's other things too, like detection possibilities from testing wastewater treatment, for example. There's a number of innovative approaches that we can take that will be invisible to the public and help support the public at the same time. But we need to be able to move ahead with that. And that comes to my last point on closing, and this may be the hardest one, is that we need to be humble. Somebody mentioned that, and that really rings true with me. We need to be humble. We don't have all the answers. We don't have all the answers in the moment. Hindsight's 2020. We need to be helpful. I also think humble. I think it's not helpful to set up what I consider to be a false dichotomy between humanity and nature, like nature is something other than us. We're here because of nature. If it wasn't for nature, we wouldn't be here. So by proxy, what we do is part of natural also. Now with that comes responsibility. Mistakes get made, mistakes need to be corrected. Willful mistakes, whether in deed or by speaking, shouldn't be tolerated, whether that comes from leaders or social media influencers or wherever that comes. We should be on guard for that. Any kind of willful deception for political means, economic means, geopolitical means, whatever it might be, we need to be on guard for that. And we need to accept our own personal responsibility. It's not someone else's job to keep me healthy. It's my job to keep me healthy, working in concert with other people, of course, but it's my job to do that. So stay humble and stay focused. And thank you, Sharif. We started on closing remarks. We had a little bit of technical difficulty with our last two presenters. So I'm not sure if you want to go to them or how you wish to continue, but Sharif, I pass the baton back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor David Schumacher. Mr. Adam, what's your concluding remarks for today?
Thank you. Something David Schumacher said earlier I thought was interesting, and that was about not falling into irrational despair and fears. And during COVID, Plus, there was a lot of uncertainty and worry and confusion about the near future and dramatic changes to our lives and our freedoms. I must admit, I've actually been pleasantly surprised and somewhat relieved at how things have gone since. Speaking only for myself, life has gone back to normal, more or less, where it is more or less how it was before all this, with just as much freedom. I haven't had to put a microchip in my arm or haven't been put under house arrest. And some people have had more shots than others, but they haven't been held down and force injected by people in white vans or black vans. Obviously, I don't want to speak too soon, but yeah, just joking. But I have enjoyed freedom again. I've been traveling, seeing friends and family. So it feels like for me, life has gone back to more or less how it was before with similar freedoms. But who knows what's coming next? You know, there have been murmurings of cyber attacks and economic collapse and worldwide internet blackouts. But again, we mustn't fill our head with too much doom. I've noticed some interesting effects since the restrictions were lifted here in England. I've noticed more people outside in the countryside visiting beautiful nature spots and stately houses and gardens because people realised how much there is to see and experience out there still left just on our doorstep. You know, lockdowns have made people thirsty for quality family time, nice places to visit, places of natural beauty or architectural beauty. There are countless National Trust places to lift the spirit, and it's probably made people realise what is important, what is enriching to one's life, but also what is fragile, what can be unfortunately taken away, which highlights the existential risk once again. We put so much effort into building lives for ourselves, building lasting legacies for our children, which will hopefully enrich them after we have passed on. Although I must say, as a creatively inclined personality, one devastating effect of COVID that really did touch me was, again in this country, was the wave of destruction that decimated independent businesses, mum and dad shops, and so on, some of which have been around for a long time. And as someone who appreciates how some of these projects are the result of a lifetime of building and dedication, a life's work, as well as what can happen when all that is taken away, it does leave a hole in my heart, it must be said. And another thing that weighs heavy is what we were seeing happening in China, like in cities like Shanghai. The Chinese government is really something, a real piece of work to say the least. But in those videos, we're also seeing a lot of unrest and anger by ordinary citizens. And when power mad megalomaniacs treat people like mere bacteria in a petri dish, then righteous indignation is a more than appropriate response. So thank you.
Thank you. Professor Ching, what's your concluding remarks for today?
Okay. Well, the choice is either we be Eskimos and American Indians, or we be Westerners and Asians who brought forth the virus which killed Eskimo and American Indians without resistance. Okay, there's such thing as cytokine storm, is a which shocks people when they don't have the immunity to a foreign matter. Okay, so this is a sort of a key point here. Yeah, I like to make a key point. You know, Donald has say something. He has one version. I let me present another version. I'm not against him. I say both versions should be taken seriously. In other words, the natural immunity is 10 times the vaccine immunity. So in other words, a person like me, who have such a close contact with my dancing fans, okay, I just don't care anything about the virus now. Every time I go dancing, I got 3 or 5 times, and it's gone in 5 minutes. Okay. In other words, there's a immune IG immunity system. Okay. You get in COVID-19, you get the IgA. These are the antibodies. IgA, IgM, IgG. Okay, you get IgG, that means the body has responded. What we really like to have is IgA, which is initial defense. The vaccine give you some kind of protein, mRNA, it just gives you something for the body to look at and start to create some defense. But what you really need is this whole regiment of army, okay, of defense to fight this. So you again we go back to the choice. You can be an Eskimo or you can be a Western or Asian. Okay, you just go out and fit in and fight it constantly, or you just you know you just say, okay, I want to hide. I don't want to be part of this thing. You see, so another thing is. You see, finally, let me give you very quickly. I don't want to take up too much time. Okay. You see, nature has two intelligent systems. The first intelligence is the living system. The second intelligence is the environmental system. Okay, all this pollution we talk about, the system which take care of the pollution is the environmental system. That's a nature intelligent system. And the human has one system that is the economic system, which is a mess. Okay, which is created by human. So basically, I think many of us seem to believe that we should be modest. We should look into nature much more than we trust ourselves. Okay, that's my conclusion. I hope other people have chance to talk. Talib and man,
Yes,
has
yes,
any.
yes. Yes. Professor Talib, what's your concluding remarks and what you want to add from Jordan?
Yeah, we cannot hear you, Talib.
Professor,
Talib, we cannot hear you.
Dr. Joy Rahman, what's your concluding remarks and what you want to add?
Well, I won't take much of your time. Let me say Eid Mubarak again. It
Eid
was
Mubarak.
concluded yesterday. The Muslims world over celebrated Eid. It's an amazing 1 month continuous self-discipline and self-governance. From morning to evening, you can't even swallow your own saliva. Very strict about what they are. And this is one fascinating set of people. We are talking about billions of people who undergo that, what is it, like in Lent or in other religions also. That self discipline is the most important thing I feel is about COVID 19. In COVID 19, when you say peering into the COVID 19 end game, there cannot be an end game for COVID 19, but there can be an end game for how we are peering into the diseases. It was influenza 100 years back and today COVID 19. We continue to do the wrong pairing. So when I said about the Project Seed is social, environmental, economic development goals of the 17 SDGs. 9 for social, 4 for environmental, and 4 for economic goals. When you say the social, we are talking about, as I mentioned about the Eid 1 month, very constant self-governance. That self-governance is very important for social profit. It cannot be done, as one of our guests had been telling, it is a self-awareness. It is not possible by the government or anybody to impose upon that. That self-governance is important for COVID-19. When you come to the environmental, it is an extension of the first one, social, where more number of people join together to control certain CO2 and other problem areas. When you come to the economic development goals, that is the rest of the 17 SDGs, we are talking on the companies as a whole. As rightly pointed out, more than 450 ships are there in Shanghai, not moving. And we have supply chain problem arising. Who is to solve the problem? So that problem is caused by COVID-19, but the action to be taken is how we are going to peering into the end game. The peering into the end game is what I would like to emphasize, and We have answers for every one of them, and we shall discuss. It is too short a period for me to explain those things, but definitely I will come back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor Talib, can you hear me? Professor Talib. Professor, we cannot hear you. Sorry about that. Sorry,
You have
we
to
cannot hear
unmute,
you.
right?
He's unmute, but in that situation, I want to give chance Professor Donald for your concluding remarks. Professor Talib, if you join me again, maybe we can try. Like you go outside and then join again. Maybe some connection related problem. I'm sorry. Yes, Professor Donald.
Well, I appreciate all these remarks, and I hope that the end game is that we learn something and that we try to change our world a little bit to be more prepared for this next time. The idea of having better ventilation. I have a HEPA filter, air filter in my house. When people come over, I turn it on because that makes a huge difference to filter the virus out in my house. If it, I've read that I will disagree about the ability for the immunity. People, I know you can get it over and over and over, and natural immunity, unfortunately, is not sufficient. But you can get it over and over if you've been vaccinated too. So it's not. You get it less. It's less severe. So that's important. That's what's good. There's two. It's complicated. There's two layers of immunity, and the you get it, but it's less severe. So I really is there's different layers. There's the layer of being able to keep it from spreading, keep it from being severe. So there's vaccinations, there's masks, there's like we learned a lot in this about keeping it from spreading, from like closing what we can close strategically. I think this whole thing about freedom was very much weird psychologically. Like people felt that having masks restricted their freedom, and I'm like, what the hell? I mean, I wear masks, and I don't feel that my freedom was restricted, but it seems very psychological to me because in Asian countries, people it's very, very common during flu season for everybody to wear masks, and they don't think a thing about it. So right now where I live, it's very common for people to still be wearing masks because we know that COVID is still very prevalent in the community.
What do you do?
So why not? I don't understand why people who are happy to get the MMR vaccines and all the other vaccines, tetanus vaccines and everything, won't get the COVID vaccine. And that had to do with basically a strong propaganda effort to make people convince the people that the vaccine had microchips in it that Bill Gates put in it and things like that, and all this weird stuff. So, but that's one level of it, the vaccination level. And then there's the other level of mitigating it with masks and everybody knows that children are a disease vector. I mean, that's how flu is passed. And so closing schools actually does slow the spread of disease massively. And so I just looked it up, and in the United States, suicide declined during COVID. It didn't increase, it declined. So the whole myth that suicide increased during COVID is a myth. It's not, it's simply not true. And we need to learn how to mitigate that. We need to learn how to we need to learn ways of making it safer. I strongly agree that the social interaction part of it needs to be figured out, and figure out ways to be able to enhance that. And then thirdly, we need to figure out the economic consequences, because as several of us have pointed out, there's 450 ships sitting in the harbor at Shanghai, and we're not going to get the materials we need to build computers and build a lot of stuff that we need those ships to sail here to do. And so we need to have different ways of having our supply chain so that we can make stuff. And what we're going to find is if we do that, it's going to be more expensive. And so we're going to have to reconfigure our economy. Things are going to be more expensive. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, we're consuming a lot more stuff than is healthy for our planet. So if in the long run, or even it's not going to be the long run, because it's happening right now, and it's not going to not happen. I mean, we're gonna go through a painful period, but the end game, or the end game, and it's not the end by a long shot, but the massive change that we're going through right now is the main consequence that we're going to have is economic, and it's got to do with the complete reconfiguration of the supply chain. COVID is huge, and then we got hit with the war in Ukraine at the same time. So what we're going to see right now is unique, and it'll be exciting.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Talib, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yay!
Yes, sir.
I can hear me finally.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you. I think the biggest lesson to be learned from this epidemic is the cooperation between countries and governments. It's all in the hands of governments, after all. Governments are dictating what they do and what they don't do. In China, for example, Shanghai is being treated as an isolated city, while in Europe, this is not happening. Now, we cannot do all of this. We have to agree on a system, on one system for the international arena. No matter what that system is, it could be lenient, it could be tough, it could be something scientific based, but it has to be one system. We cannot operate each country on its own, its government on its own, which is what is happening now. The name of the game is not how good each government would do alone, not how bad China is doing, or how good the United States is doing, or UK, or France. It's how are we working together. I think the multilateral system has to activate itself again. I believe strongly the fact that the biggest lesson to be learned, we failed it, is the fact that we are not coping as governments together. Because you can't go from one country to another if the differences are different. In Europe, we have 4 systems. A system of quarantine, complete lockdown, then quarantine, then you have the vaccinating, then you have the testing. Each one of those 4 systems is operated in Europe. Europe is one unit, but it's not acting as one. I'm talking to you from Spain now. Spain is very liberal in its attitude now towards COVID, unlike China. But you can't have 2 systems, one world. Our world is one world. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you so much, Sharif.
Thank you, Professor. Professor, are you okay? Everything okay? Because your voice naturally not like it's different today. So I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Physically, you are fit. Like everything okay? Okay.
Everything
we
is fine.
want healthy.
Fell on my back. I broke my L too. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you,
It's
sir.
operating.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Professor Paul, what's your concluding remarks?
Well, just like to reiterate that education is very important. The more the public knows about pandemics, the more the public knows about the climate crisis, things like that, the more likely we are to get politicians to act to reduce these problems. I've talked a lot about air ventilation, indoor air quality. Most of these pandemics are indoor diseases. People going out for a walk in the fresh air, is probably the best thing that you can do when a pandemic is raging, and no need to wear masks. You're quite safe out in outdoor environments. And people didn't even realize that at the beginning of the virus. Lockdowns, keeping people inside, keeping them, is the exact opposite of what you need to do. I mean,
You
people
could not
should
touch
be
things. You could not
outside,
touch things at the beginning.
and also, there was a big scare that people were catching this virus from surfaces, from a doorknob or something like this. And, that's just not the scientific case, that people were catching it just from breathing the virus particles in the air, the whole time. And so those are lessons. We tend to we have to figure out how to educate people so that they're not falling for all of these conspiracy theories, so that they're not having the most outrageous, idiotic ideas. And I'm looking at the U.S., for in a big way, because some of the conspiracies and some of the nonsense, and we've got an entire political party which is acting on nonsense and not on science. And the ruling on Roe versus Wade, for example. I mean, the idiot. On the one hand, we have white males essentially who want to control the rights of females, to take control of their bodies, what they can and cannot do. And on the other hand, they're yelling and screaming that their freedoms are impinged upon by having to wear masks in a pandemic. And it's just we have companies like Fox News. They call themselves a news station, and yet it's propaganda, and they're owned by people from other countries. So there's a lot of social problems. I'm pointing my finger at the U.S., but it happens in many other places. And I think it all started with misinformation on climate change years ago. Lies and misinformation on climate change. And since then, it's spread to all other aspects of society and politics. So, social media, of course, has a big role in it. But societies need to get a handle on this, and we need better education in the schools, starting at the very, very lowest levels. Students need to learn some sort of basic science about, basic information about how the world works, about what climate change is, about what a pandemic is, about what causes it. Because as adults, they have no clue, many people, as to any science whatsoever, and therefore they fall for what they read, or they have no internal filters to actually judge whether something they read or hear on the internet is complete malarkey, nonsense, or factual. They have no filter, and they get into these echo chambers, and then they get these beliefs and ideology that is fixed, and nothing can change their minds. They're lost causes at that point. So we need a decent education system to inoculate people so that they actually question things that they read and hear, and don't fall, hook, line, and sinker for these conspiracy ideas. So thank you, Sharif. for running these sessions once a day.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, our honorable speaker, for joining today's session. Professor Paul actually bring very important point. This is uh, there are many news and many propaganda and many things. Uh, from World Talent Economy Forum, as a founder of World Talent Economy Forum, I can ensure uh, that World Talent Economy Forum, what we run, it's a very small organization. We run based on people wish, people goodwill, and this is our asset. Good people is our asset. We do not have any sponsor. We do not have any funding member. We only have good people like you, those who regularly contribute their knowledge. And one thing, I'm very impressed after the sessions when I see country like Bangladesh, India, Malaysia, Singapore, all of the countries state head, they communicate with us, central bank, they communicate with us, and they say that uh, World Talent Economy Forum perhaps the best platform they can collaborate. World Talent Economy Forum can help them to develop policy and develop research. Uh, Many good things actually happening. So I believe, like Professor Ching always said, today is a money-oriented society. Yes, you are true, but if we have a goodwill, if we have a good people, if we have a really good knowledge, this is more powerful than money. And what I learned from World Talent Economy Forum regularly, our good speakers, our valuable speakers, always they contributing through our open dialogue. We are organizing many research projects, many scholars from around the world. We have more than 600 scientists, those who are actually contributing for our scientific paper. Many youth communities we have in the grassroots level level area in India, in Bangladesh, in Malaysia, in China, in Africa. They never engage with research. Now they are engaging. That is the beauty of talent economy, and it's happened because all of your support, all of your contributions. So your knowledge, your experience is priceless. Always we try to focus on that particular area, and I believe with your contributions we can make history. How we growing right now, thousand and thousand people actually supporting us, they collaborating with us, they joining with us, they engaging with us. I'm sure, I do not know how much money our speakers will make, but I'm sure they will be part of the history in the futures. Thank you, Professor David Schumacher,
Thank you,
Professor
thank you.
Professor Donald, Professor Talib. You are very, very good man and big man, but
Thank you,
continuously you support me, and
thank you,
you are also a good example for
thank you,
all of our speakers. Professor Paul, Professor Joyraman, all of you have a most important thing. All of you are good men. You are a great example for the talent economy. You are the creator for the future leader, the future economy. Many of my students, many of my guardians, students guardian, they want to develop politician like Talib, develop professors like Donalds or Professor Jayaraman, develop scientists like Paul Ching. That is the beauty of World Talent Economy Forum. So hopefully your contribution will develop new world. Thank you. Bye bye and take care.
Thank
thank
you.
you, thank you, thank you,
Thank you.
thank you, Sharif, thank you,
Thank you.
my dear.